The sun is just all up in my face, but I don't have time to wait for the light to change. So here we are. I wanted to start a new series because I've been focusing so much on independently published books, specifically a lot of self-published ebooks. I wanted to start highlighting some specific ones, namely the worst to the best, because there are some books that kind of hold true to the essentially the stereotype of what self-published books are, but there's also some that rise above it, and I wanted to show kind of the extent to which it goes. Oh good, the sun's finally going down. I can see again. Disclaimer, I am going to try to edit. I'm going to try to have something up here when I talk about it, because I feel like holding up the Nook or the Kindle that I have doesn't really do all that well on the camera. So we're going to try. So I apologize now if this is weird. I'm new at this. But for the worst, I'm going to start with the worst and end with the best. We have Goliath by Richard Turner. Now, this book, at first glance, sounded exactly like my kind of book. I mentioned it before my wrap-up, but it bears repeating. The synopsis is all about this airship that went down, this blimp that crashed, and there was some mysterious object on it that people wanted. It was like if, you know, the Hindenburg had something from the Manhattan Project or something. I'm trying to think of, you know, historical ideas that are similar to this, but yeah, it sounded like something I would love. I love that whole historical artifact resurfaces and it leads to a chase around the world, or, you know, what I like to call the Atlantis genre, where you have this ancient thing that pops up and it's going to grant you power or something, and you're chasing after it, and you've got this other group chasing you. It's the Vatican a lot of the time for some reason. So I thought, okay, this is great. This is exactly my kind of book. And then I read it. I forced myself to finish it. Forced myself. Because there were multiple times where I was like, I could just DNF this. Then I was like, you know what? I knew I wanted to talk about it in a video, and it was short. So I said, you know, I'll push through so I can fully say exactly why I don't like this. So my first issue that I didn't like this is InstaLove, and not even well done InstaLove, where the female character of Jen Marsh looks at the man who just rescued her from the first of many kidnapping attempts, and somehow she just knew that he could be trusted. They hadn't spoken 2 words. He wasn't the only man that rescued her, so it wasn't even a case of, oh, you know, hero syndrome. And he just knew that she was special and invited her on a date right after saving her from being kidnapped. Okay, fine. Multiple kidnapping attempts later, and I mean multiple, like 3 or 4 times, before this evil Russian dude whose daughters wear tracksuits. Stereotypes. Okay. Finally kidnaps her. And here is where the real issue arises. I read a lot of romance. Romance has a lot of military man with a female love interest that gets kidnapped. That's standard for the romance genre. But here's why it's standard. Here's what you're supposed to do when that instance happens. You are supposed to have the man losing his mind with worry and freaking out over the loss of his female romantic interest. That's the point of it. Because every woman that obsessively reads romance wants that to happen if something should happen to her. You know, the man yells, it's Katie, she's taken, and he gets all freaked out. That's what women want in a male love interest in this instance, and it didn't happen. Ryan Mitchell, the head, I don't remember what exactly his title was. He was ex-military in the security service. She gets kidnapped, he doesn't care. Like, at all. Well, not doesn't care, he cares, but like, you never see the depth of his actual worry that anything's going to be wrong. And the second part that I take issue with the kidnapping is that it doesn't really make sense. The character of Jen Marsh has studied the Goliath, has studied the big airship that went down, but doesn't know whatever mysterious object that is on it that this evil Russian dude wants. Then you find out that it's actually not that important. It is from a historical sense, but it is in a ace in the hole for this evil Russian dude, in that it is the apparently real Romanov family jewels. Apparently what's in Moscow is actually fakes, and these are the real ones. And like, yeah, that's important, and that's very historically relevant, and that's very like interesting. But if you're an evil man trying to take over Russia, having the jewels aren't exactly the ace in the hole. Now, the dude is Romanov, or claims to be, so it'd be a familial claim to the throne, I guess. But it never made any sense. He was so obsessed with it. And at the end of the day, the whole Goliath plot was really just a subplot, because the guy had nuclear bombs. So, like, the whole point of it was actually the nuclear bombs. And the Goliath with the Romanov jewels was just like the icing on the cake, which also annoyed me. Like, if that's going to be the setup for your synopsis, is mysterious airship goes down, this guy needs some mysterious object and is willing to kidnap this woman to get it, then that should be the primary plot. It shouldn't be secondary. Be like, oh, he has a thing. Oh, but he has nukes. Nukes. Like, no. The nukes do way more for his plans for world domination than freaking the Romanov jewels. That's just standard. People are going to be way more obsessed with, crap, this guy has nukes, than, oh, he has the Romanov jewels. But whatever. The other thing that annoyed me was the character of Jen Marsh apparently has, like, psychic powers. Now, not to say that, like, the book says that she has psychic powers. She just must have psychic powers, because there are gigantic issues with the things that she says or things she apparently knows without any reason for knowing them. Like, when she's looking at the schematics of the Goliath, she points to a spot because, you know, evil Russian Romanov has basically a gun to her head, or a gun to the head of her mother, and says, you have to find it for me. And so she points to her in a spot, and magically that's there. She did not know it was there ahead of time. She did not come across it in her studies. She had no idea. And then there was the part at the beginning I mentioned earlier where she just knew that he was a good guy, that he was the one she fell in love with. But the funniest part was actually at the end, when one of the Romanov's evil daughters, the last remaining after the, you know, I think his name was Dmitri. I remember it was a very generic Russian name, gets killed. She gets murdered by one of the goons she had originally hired, and it was this kind of cool moment of comeuppance. And, like, at the very end of the epilogue, Jen, like, stops. She goes, I don't know why, but I feel like we're suddenly safe, or we're finally safe. And I was like, what? She had no reason to know that this, you know, the blonde Russian woman in the tracksuit was dead. Magically felt that she was safe. So she must have had psychic powers. In general, no, and it sucked because I should have loved this book. I should have been on board with this book from beginning to end. Should have been awesome. And I hate that I had to force myself to read it. The only good news is that I can cross off that series off of my TBR. I'm not going to continue with it because it is supposed to be one of those every book is its own race against something. And again, usually would have loved that. That one just didn't stick with me. But the one I did love, my new favorite book that I have requested to 20 people already, I don't even know, is Star Nomad by Lindsay Buroker. I really should figure out how to pronounce her name if I'm going to keep bringing it up in videos. This is sci-fi. Also a free self-published ebook that I got from BookBub, but this, in quality of storytelling, is much improved over Goliath. The premise is intriguing to me. It follows Elisa Marchenko. She was a pilot for this rebellion against an evil empire. Yes, it is Star Warsy, but it is much different in telling. She is left on this desert planet after she gets injured, and when she's finally healed, basically realizes that no one's coming to get her. She's just left there. Her home planet was bombed by the Empire. Her husband is dead, but her daughter is still alive and living with her husband's sister. So her whole goal is to get off this desert planet and get home to her daughter and kind of figure out the next steps from there. So she finds her mother's old freighter, which admittedly was a bit of a plot convenience for me, that the freighter her mother flew as a child just happened to also be on this desert planet that she was stranded on. But I guess to a certain extent, it didn't bother me too much. So she wants to use her mother's old freighter, the Star Nomad, aka the title, to get off the ship, but she finds out that there's a cyborg named, well, she calls him Leonidas, not his real name, but his real name is actually really pretentious sounding, so I don't want to say it. And he was a cyborg warrior or whatever with the Empire. Now the war is over, but the tensions have not gone. It's their arguments, their fights with each other over who was actually in the right during the war is a regular issue throughout this journey. He refuses to let her on the ship unless she agrees to take him to this asteroid because he has mysterious plan of his own or mysterious goal of his own. And on top of this, she also takes on some passengers to essentially pay for the supplies she needs. And so you have another supposedly security guy that you find out isn't actually that great at security, is actually a way better chef. Her mechanic friend that is my favorite kind of mechanic trope, where it's the short girl with the pixie cut that's really spunky. And I know it's a trope, but it's my favorite. So she has all these people. She has a monk / scientist, like he's both religious and into science and was part of the Empire. And then this young woman who has all of these quote unquote wares that are basically drugs and chickens. She brings a lot of chickens on. And so you've got this kind of ragtag group of people traveling through space. And I love ragtag groups of people, and I love anything involving like spaceship battles. Well, not battles, flights. They're on a freighter. But the story in itself just gripped me. I was literally at one point out to eat with friends after a wrestling show, and I actually had my phone out with the Nook app on. And I was like kind of scrolling through it while we were at dinner, trying to like read while having a conversation. It hooked me that much. And I love the themes of it. I love the idea of, you know, the fact that the rebellion won. They beat the big bad empire, but everything is not magically better. There are certain aspects, certain things that the empire were kind of holding in grips, holding together, infrastructures that they were keeping up that are falling apart. So there's more piracy, there's more mercenaries, there's, you know, gangs, all these other things that kind of rushed up. And Elisa essentially is forced to confront the fact that, you know, them winning wasn't the be-all, end-all to make the world a better place, or make the galaxy a better place. And she also finds out that Leonidas actually has his own code of honor. He wasn't just trying to be this horrible monster, defeating everyone. In his mind, he was doing the noble thing of upholding the infrastructure and keeping the galaxy under some level of I guess, order. And he holds the Alliance, the Rebel Alliance, as being the bad guys because they were fighting with guerrilla tactics, hiding and using spies and that kind of thing, which to him was very dishonorable. And so I love that whole idea of neither side in a war having the pure, unadulterated good guyness or bad guyness. That both sides have this kind of mix of, okay, maybe we weren't ultimately the good guy. And they do start to respect each other. I think I saw there was a little bit of sexual tension. Leonidas was very well built, and Elisa did mention that a couple times. So I wouldn't be surprised if further down in the series they end up becoming an item, and I quite frankly would be all there for that. The series, it leaves a lot of space to go, and the series is fairly long. I don't know how many books, I'd have to double check, but we are talking at least 4, 5, 6 books, more than a trilogy. And I plan on reading all of them. I'm trying to space it out because, again, I got to read more of my own books. But this one I loved. So, in general, we had the book that could have been awesome and really fell flat. Although I guess you could say that was a case of not advertising correctly, or maybe even flat out a bait and switch, where what you say in your synopsis isn't what's brought up in the book. And in this case, you can't even blame like a publisher or anything. It's self-published. Richard Turner got to decide what was put in the synopsis. And then you have a case of fantastic, absolutely fantastic storytelling with Lindsay Broker. And this is not some random little side book I found. She is actually a completely, what's the word I'm looking for? she can essentially support herself, self-supporting published author, in that she doesn't have to have a secondary job or a spouse that works for her. She can make enough from her books to actually live. So this is not an unknown self-published author by any means. She's very active on Twitter, though, which is awesome. I've actually gotten to talk to her a couple times. But yeah, so this is sort of the idea of self-published books get such a bad rap for being like what Goliath was. But in reality, star nomads exist too. And I actually kind of, in a weird way, like that the Goliaths of self-publishing exist, because that makes the star nomads so much cooler. So this video's been running a little bit long, and I've got to get to editing and putting it up. But if you are interested in learning more about the indie books, the best and the worst of self-published books or independent books in general, please give this a like and subscribe. I'm definitely going to be turning this into a series as I come across more books I really, really love and really, really don't love. I'll bring those up again. But until then, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.